Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And I'm Jade Walle.
And we are the FAIRtax
guys.
And all three of us now. Jade, you're one of us now officially. So
That's
we've
right.
got three FAIRtax
Should have gotten the
guys.
certificate in the mail just the other day. If it's not there, we'll fax it to you.
Well, you're
We
back.
appreciate everybody being out there.
Yes,
listening,
you're
watching,
back with us in fairly short order. We had you there in that chair a couple of weeks ago talking about how much the income tax system costs the American people, and that's quite a bunch. But we are back today for our quarterly Walle's World, our Walle's FAIRtax World. We'll do it that way, and where you take a particular topic and just really dig into it relative to the FAIRtax. And you've picked a good one today. I mean, if you haven't been in a coma for the past year, you understand that inflation has returned to the American economy in gangbusters. So today we're going to dive deep into the effects of how the FAIRtax implementation might affect the U.S. for the inflation that we're seeing for the first time in 40 years. Now, I read something the other day that inflation's like at 8.5% now, and that is just staggering. And, Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, people have never, those of us who live long enough to remember when Jimmy Carter was president have seen this once before. But a lot of the younger folks, have never seen this and don't know how to deal with it.
Well, obviously, inflation is a complex topic, and it's hard to describe exactly what it is and what causes it. Probably isn't as easy as an equation to solve. Like other economic issues. Jade, is that a fair assessment of how you approach inflation, how the average person would approach inflation?
I think so, Bob. And thanks for having me here today, guys. Hope you got through tax day, April 18th, all right and unscathed. Hopefully,
it was a mental exercise. It's always a mental exercise.
Yeah. Yes. Well, maybe your interest-free loan to the government was returned to you by now. Hopefully,
would be nice. Yeah.
No, I agree with you, Bob. I think inflation is the residual after effect of other macroeconomic policies, global and domestic markets, many other direct economic metrics that we talk about. We talk about quite a bit with the FAIRtax. For example, the interplay with national debt, GDP, jobs, aka employment, domestic investment, capital stock, consumption, real wages, and the always coveted purchasing power and disposable personal income. So it'll be interesting to see the effect of the FAIRtax on these various drivers of economic activity and then interpolate into the effect on inflation.
Sounds like a plan to me. Specifically, what do you want to talk about?
Well, let's briefly summarize what over 20 years of PhD level economic study has determined about the effect of the FAIRtax on our U.S. economy. I'll cut to the chase. The FAIRtax will be rocket fuel for the economy. This phrase has been used for a while to describe the effect of the FAIRtax, and recently, in the July 2020 article, Stephen Moore, one of President Trump's economic advisors, said it again, and he noted that a national consumption tax would be his moonshot, a way to stimulate the U.S. economy like nothing ever has.
Okay, what specific economic measures would increase with the FAIRtax according to these studies that we're talking about here?
All of the following metrics would fare significantly better after FAIRtax adoption. So we've got GDP, employment, domestic investment, income from employment, that's wages, consumption, and disposable personal income, which is basically how much money is left in your pocket at the end of the day after consuming what you need and paying your taxes. The studies, which are available on the research tab at fairtax.org, then under the economy link, lay this out in vivid detail and depict the FAIRtax's effect after years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10 of implementation, which is really nice. The largest winners, percentage-wise, out of the above are wages and domestic investment, increasing by over 40% by year 10 after the FAIRtax is the law of the land. It's incredible.
Oh, incredible indeed. So let's take an offshoot here from the original question. What exactly do you want to dive into today? We've kind of laid the foundations of the general effect that the FAIRtax will have on the U.S. economy, but specifically, what are we going to dive into?
Sure, Bob. Let's first dive into how the FAIRtax would affect the underlying cost of everything we consume at the retail level. as we know, when we're in an inflationary environment, things are costing more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So said plainly, the fair tax is an enormous cost reducer. Let that sink in.
I am. Yeah, because people will say, well, I've got to pay 23% on top of what I'm already paying. That's crazy. But what is not promoted effectively, and the consideration, of course, is more people get ingrained in their line of thinking, that competitive the competitive nature of business will drive the taxes that were embedded in the cost of production, bringing the product or service to the market, are going to go away. So effectively, you're replacing the consumption tax of the fair tax with the embedded taxes on production that will essentially be neutral in a calculation of the cost of an item as as time goes on. The question I always have, and this is it's something about that part of it. People will buy a $20 item and they'll pay 23% on it. Well, a $20 item has a certain amount of tax in it based on the resources and the time and things, people's wages, et cetera, that went into the making of it. How long would it take for that, do you think, to level out? Is there a bump in the road at the day the fair tax gets implemented, or how is that going to work?
Yeah, hang on a second. You said it's it's a reducer. How is adding a tax to the price of things? Seems like that'd make everything go up.
Yeah, and obviously our listening audience, if they know us, we're setting them up, right? So I gave you a beautiful behind the back pass, Bob, and you gave me the best alley-oop I've seen in a long time. And even with my vertically inhibited 5'7" frame, I can leap up and slam this one home. So
hang on, Scarborough. This is going to be worth watching. All right, go.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So as we all read the original Neil Bort's fair tax books. We know that, just like Bob Scarborough was saying, the embedded cost of the income and payroll tax system permeates the cost of everything we consume in the U.S. Best estimates, depending on the industry, are that these costs fall out of what we consume at the retail level in the range of 10 to 25% or more. Think about all employers not having to match their employees' 7.65% FICA withholdings, for example. These significant cost decreases will be slightly more than offset when the 23% inclusive fair tax is added into the retail price of new goods and services, and people living in the country illegally and those participating in the illegal underground economy become federal taxpayers for the first time. When they make retail purchases, everyone will pay the fair taxes they consume. But back to Mr. Scarborough's question, there's no way to truly know. No one has a crystal ball, and we're not Voltar from the movie Big, but Zoltar. But what we do know is that we have an efficient or semi-efficient economy. And what that means is when prices go down, there might be a little bit of poker face going on with, well, I'm not going to lower my price, United Airlines, compared to American or Delta. But guess what happens? Competition and market share. I want more market share. I can lower my price and make the same profit because these costs have fallen out. Boom, 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 boom. Prices go down very quickly. I think within the first year, this is Jade Walle prediction, no exact empirical science to prove this out one way or the other. I think within the first year, things are completely leveled out from that embedded cost falling out of the price of everything we consume.
Well, we see this in practice pretty much every time we drive by 3 gas stations within a mile of each other. The first one is going to be at $3.79. The second one might be at $3.84, but only for a short period of time, because they're going to see folks not driving into their establishment to pick up even for 5 cents within a mile. So the gas stations all even out the price of the fuel within a very short period of time. Competition, the first person out of the gate is going to get the benefit of extra people at his pump and in his convenience store for maybe 12 hours. And then everybody else is going to, their price is going to go down. So I would think that the same thing will happen on the consumer side from a retail purchase standpoint or services. somebody that's offering a special deal for servicing your air conditioner for the season or that kind of thing at $99. Somebody's going to throw in, $79 very quickly, and then everybody else will fall in to some competitive level around that without the bottom dropping out of it, obviously. But the expenses of bringing that product or service to market is going to be radically changed by the effects of a tax on consumption, the fair tax. And I'm ready for it. I'm so ready to see this happen. So ready.
I am too.
Now, are we saying here that, we've been hearing all along that the fair tax is going to be the greatest shot in the arm that the economy could possibly receive? People will be bringing home their entire paycheck, no federal withholding, no payroll taxes, legal households will be getting the prebate. And so is it possible that the fair tax may actually lead to an overheated economy and more inflation? What about that risk?
Well, again, hindsight's 20/20, foresight is not, no crystal ball, but let's inspect some of the other factors at play. With the fair tax making the U.S. the world's new tax haven, capital investment in the U.S. should rise to unprecedented levels. This natural effect of this new level of capital investment, guess what it leads to? More R&D, research and development, more innovation, and this naturally fuels an increase in U.S. productivity. Think in the past when railroads get introduced, textiles and automobiles, you see productivity skyrocket. Increased productivity would act to counter increasing costs as productivity improvements lead to lower per unit costs.
The light bulb goes on.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm tracking and this makes sense on productivity. Let's go back for just a minute. You walk us through an example of what a new car, for instance, would cost under this new paradigm.
Now, that's a good example. Let's take a car no one has likely heard of, a Tesla Model Y, manufactured by Elon Musk's California production factory. And I know it might be an unknown car brand to you. I think the person who hasn't heard of Tesla and Elon Musk is likely in that same coma as that guy or gal who isn't aware of the current inflation phenomenon, right?
Right.
We can't forget that the current U.S. market requires that we make purchases with after-tax dollars. That means, let's just break it down. That new $60,000 Model Y Tesla you've been coveting actually costs nearly $86,000. Wait a minute, how is that? Well, assuming you're
Wait a minute, how's that?
Yeah, how's that? Okay, go
Well,
ahead.
let's say if you're in the market for a Model Y, you're probably, let's just call it a 30% effective tax rate. You have to earn about $86,000 and pay almost $26,000 in taxes in order to have the $60,000 residual needed to purchase the Tesla. Given the massive supply chain involved with the domestically produced automobile, and in our example, Tesla's California car plant, fair tax studies indicate that a U.S. automobile's cost would drop by approximately 20%. That's that 10 to 25% range we talked about earlier. Automobiles would be a pretty big cost drop because of the complexity and the length of the supply chain. And then there would be a new 23% inclusive fair tax included in the cost of the new Model Y. Diving in deeper, we see that our lives are much rosier with the fair tax. So 3 things. Currently, we must earn $86,000 to purchase the $60,000 Tesla. With the 20% embedded tax cost removed, the new Tesla would cost only $48,000. Add in the inclusive 23% fair tax, just over $14,000, and the retail price rises to slightly above $62,000. At first glance, it looks like the car would cost more, $62,000 versus the $60,000, but with the fair tax. But here's the rest of the story. Remember, with the fair tax, we bring home our entire paycheck, like you said, Bob. Therefore, with the fair tax, we only have to earn this $62,000 in order to purchase the Tesla, compared to the $86,000 we need to earn under the income tax. Let this sink in.
Paying the taxes, and they're not paying the $26,000 in taxes in the example.
That's exactly right. Let that sink in. $86,000 to earn now, $62,000 to earn under the fair tax. Even if retail prices are just slightly higher, that 23%, eclipses the 20% reduction in cost. We'll still have more purchasing power under the fair tax than under the income tax. This simple example reveals that costs will not truly skyrocket under the fair tax, and practically speaking, will actually need to earn less to buy the same product relative to our current income and payroll tax system. And here's the kicker. This stimulates the economy, but not inflation.
Right, because
Pretty
people
cool
are
little
going to go
real
buy-
life
they're gonna go buy
example.
the Tesla. They're going to
Yeah.
go buy the Tesla because now I think there's going to be a cumulative, everybody waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and sitting straight up in bed and going, I got it. I understand. I am ready to go move forward and bring the fair tax, tax on consumption, not the flat tax, folks. And in case you just joined us, we're not talking about the flat tax, which is still an income tax. We're talking about a tax on consumption, which drives the taxes to build the product or service and bring it to the market out of the cost. Competition, natural competition amongst businesses competing for your dollars for services and goods are going to be working hard to make sure you continue to buy their products. So they're going to be the first one to the bottom is going to be the winner in terms of cost. And this model of using Tesla as a model, especially with cost of battery production, you're looking at China as a major supplier of lithium. If there's anything that's going to help the United States of America get in competition, it's going to be sweeping out as many of the embedded taxes as possible. And I would venture to say that it would probably drive the cost of those resources into, even from international sources, the cost of the resources to go into the products are going to go down as well.
Let me run this by you. I have heard, many people that all seem to be having the same visceral reaction. Wow, 23% tax. It's going to make my life 23% more expensive. But that obviously isn't the case. They're not looking at the costs that drop out of the prices that the fair tax gets rid of. But what other effects may the fair tax have on inflation?
Well, a couple other points I'd highlight. First, as our productivity increases with capital investments, our US dollar gains strength on the world stage relative to other currencies. This is a key point. A rising dollar lowers the cost of importing goods. We import more goods for less dollars. So this works as a natural hedge against inflation. Because our companies are paying less to import their goods from abroad and don't have to raise their prices at the think Walmart, a large retailer's cash register, because it costs them less dollars to buy that same whoopee cushion from China. Yeah. Also, as you might guess, inflation tends to devalue a currency. With inflation, the same dollar buys less than it used to. Not a complex concept. Consequently, you don't normally see a strong dollar in an inflationary environment. And as we just pointed out, the fair tax leads to a much stronger dollar relative to other currencies. That's going to help with inflation.
All right, hang on just a second. Let's take a break for just a second. I've seen that our dollar is strengthening in recent weeks, but we have record high inflation because there's plenty of dollars chasing fewer products right now. It seems strange, especially given what you just said about the normal relationship of a weaker dollar and higher inflation.
Great observation, Bob. You are correct. I was reading in today's taping is April 29th, 2022. And in the Wall Street Journal this morning, it takes only $1.05 to buy €1. This is the highest the dollar's been relative to euro in years that I can remember. It seemed like forever it was hovering in, around $1.15 to buy a euro. The key word here is relative. The current phenomenon, as best as I can tell by reading what economists are deciphering, is that because we've begun aggressively raising U.S. interest rates and indicated more rate increases are coming, perhaps in the 50 basis point bundles, and the rest of the world, specifically Europe, has not been as monetarily aggressive in their efforts to curtail inflation, that we fare better. This means that although we have record high inflation, we seem to be contemplating doing more to fight it than Europe. So when comparing the dollar to euro, it's all relative, our dollar will grow stronger. And this is an unusual situation, but what is normal anymore, right? So if you have a child that gets in a fight, bloodies his face, breaks his knuckle, and comes home with ripped clothes, disheveled and dirty, you're not going to be a happy dad. However, if you're talking with your neighbor and their kid was just arrested for heroin and cocaine distribution and running an illegal prostitution ring, your feelings about your child in that moment relative to your neighbor's kid might not be as strong as they otherwise would have been. It's the same thing with our dollar right now. Bringing it back around, the fair tax leads to a stronger dollar, which is not an inflationary environment occurrence, regardless of what we're experiencing now.
Okay, that makes sense. But so you're saying the fair tax leads to an economic environment that is strong, thriving, growing, diverse, all kinds of good stuff like that. And it's experiencing unprecedented rise in productivity, innovation, all that's going on there. That sounds wonderful. Perhaps you let the Congress critters know that this incredible replacement tax system is up there in front of them as we speak. HR 25, the fair tax. Any other points to bring home here?
Yeah, one last thought, Bob. We can never forget that the fair tax, while not a spending bill per se, will bring unprecedented transparency and sunlight into how Congress spends our U.S. Treasury's receipts. There will be no more tax credits, loopholes, deductions, exemptions, or exclusions, refundable credits, advanced refundable credits that all muddy the water of what is actually spent in Washington.
You've been reading Congress.gov. You know what they're up to.
Yeah, exactly.
Publication 17 out the window.
Yeah, and you guys highlight it every week on FairTax Power Radio. It's incredible, and we'll dive deep into what this means because I think the concept isn't initially understood. This fair tax, though, will be a natural inhibitor to the runaway spending that politicians on both sides of the aisle have been engaging in for the last several decades. This is relevant because, as we often hear, inflation can be thought of as what? Too many dollars chasing too few products or services. And this has been front and center these past 2 years, almost 2 years. Although not a guarantee we won't spend ourselves into oblivion, the fair tax will elegantly guard and protect the U.S. from such policies that are the primary drivers of inflation, that being runaway government spending. So to dive in here, if we take our current U.S. budget, we can see the breakdown by category and spending. Let me just make up numbers. 40% defense, 40% Social Security and Medicare, and 20% other domestic spending programs. And I know it gets more granular than that, but just for argument's sake. With the fair tax, expenditures aren't shrouded in the secrecy of deductions or credits. This is what I was alluding to. This is hard to wrap your head around, but it is actually simple calculus. What is the fair tax rate and what do we spend our tax receipts on? And going back, right now, if you get a mortgage interest deduction on your home, that means you're paying less taxes. The Treasury's taking in more receipts than they otherwise would have if you didn't have that deduction. So it's not a expense of the Treasury, but it is. And what Neil Bortz talked about in the fair tax book was that's a expense on the tax side of the ledger. All right. Those tax sides of the ledger expenditures, those go away because no more deductions, exemptions, loopholes, credits, etc. Did I cut you off there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here in dreamland because, and I think our job and the folks that are watching and listening, wherever you might happen to be, you need to sit down for a moment after the program is over and consider how you can help move the fair tax forward. Of course, here in North Carolina on the 17th, we have our primary. It's a Tuesday. Folks are getting together. They're starting to coalesce around the candidates that are available. You should go and be a part of those meetings, get engaged with the candidates, let them know about the fair tax, because as we've talked about many times on the show, it's probably going to be easier for us to get new people into office who carry the fair tax understanding with them as it's going to be to convince somebody who is already ingrained in the Washington mode of operation to get them to change the way they're doing things. And it becomes more clear every time I wake up in the morning and realize, more spending, more taxes. Here's how we're going to whip inflation. We're going to go out there and raise taxes. We're going to do all these magical things that I don't know that politicians really have any idea from an economic standpoint what the heck they're talking about. They just like the fact that they're getting money. That's what they like.
Agree. And let me go back to the transparency real quick, that it's really super simple with the fair tax, meaning outside of more deficit national debt increases, we can clearly see the components of the fair tax rate increases or decreases that any politician wants to make and see that effect on government spending. We can't see that now with the income tax increases or other changes to the code and the deductions and the loopholes.
Right.
With the fair tax, we'll be able to clearly see where each percent of the 23% inclusive rate goes by comparing it to the U.S. budget's categorical composition, like I put forth before, which leads to incredible transparency that will naturally defend against runaway fair tax rate increases and runaway spending. And the reason this is key is why, Bob?
Well, if I'm hearing you right, then you're saying that the fair tax will act as an inhibitor to the runaway spending, and the runaway spending is the biggest factor fueling inflation. I got that?
Ding, ding, ding. You nailed it, Bob. You just delivered the coup de grace and described, absent everything else we talked about today, why the fair tax would be an incredible harbinger of sunlight on our governmental spending. And as we all know, runaway government spending leads to painful inflation. And oh, by the way, just like the current system's regressive payroll tax, inflation is one of the worst taxes on the working poor. It is painful and necrotic to our American workers' bank accounts, savings, and overall lifestyle. And as we can see, the fair tax, for multiple reasons, leads to an economic environment that will be the antithesis of what an inflationary economy looks like.
Yeah, that's exciting because folks that are at the working poor level, and I speak with people all the time, they listen to this show on our radio station here in Winston-Salem. Family members are working 2 and 3 jobs, and as available as jobs are, there's only 24 hours in a day, and there's only so much that a person can earn in that amount of time. To understand how impacting their taxes are on them, the fact that the inflation is they're taking more dollars out of their pocket just to get to and from that job or buy groceries, et cetera. It's something that I believe they will lead. The working poor will lead this across the finish line to get their neighbors and other friends and family members to come on board and understand that the fair tax is the solution, the big solution for a lot of our nation's woes, and add that rocket fuel into our economy at a time where it is greatly needed.
Okay. Well, any parting thoughts here? I think you've done a pretty good job here.
Yeah, before I conclude, Bob, one thing, I talk with a controller at one of my clients that we audit their financial statements. And when we talk, in our personal time about the fair tax, he thought, one of the things, what have we really had to deal with over 40 years? And maybe not necessarily deflation, but stagflation. And we've heard this term where things just kind of meander around. And if you can tell by everything we've talked about today, if we switch the topic to deflation or stagflation, obviously the fair tax would be a huge, huge counter effect to any kind of deflation or stagflation, right? Now, I don't think it leads to inflation like we've covered today, but it will definitely lead to a stronger economy with robust growth, increases in productivity, and all the things that would completely counteract stagflation. And so I wanted to slip that in there, but I'll conclude by saying, in business, the less complex and cumbersome and the more efficient and streamlined a system is, in my years, the better that system will operate with less room for error, fraud, or abuse. This is obvious, and it rings true when we hear it out loud. The less complex a system, the more efficient it's going to be. Therefore, we can confidently conclude that although a multitude of factors will be in play, the fair tax gives us a much stronger and realistic opportunity to avoid painful and regressive inflation spikes than we get with the income tax. So, Bob, that's all I have. I answer any questions you got, but thanks a ton for having me.
I'm impressed.
Hey, you add a lot of class to this operation. You know what I'm saying? a couple of Bobs sitting around, throwing stuff back and forth. We understand and we get passionate, all of us that are involved in volunteering with Americans for Fair Taxation. There are folks out there in every state in the union that have crossed their ears, or they've said them, fair tax. And that's the brand name. It's a tax on consumption. And sometimes the fair tax gets buffeted up against the words flat tax. And we know that those are two completely different things, but we get passionate here. And to have a person like you, Jade, on the team is phenomenal, because you're in the middle of tax code understanding. The things that you all do at your firm, go far beyond our, I have a calculator that goes plus, minus, multiply, divide, and that's pretty much it. But you all get into the minutia of this and understand how greatly effective the fair tax will be. A tax on consumption will be on the American economy. And as I said a minute ago, at what better time in history would its implementation actually be effective and welcomed, I think, by a larger majority of people than under normal circumstances.
Completely agree. Well said.
All right.
So
Well, I'll tell you what.
thank you for bringing all this to us. Yeah, we need to
Well,
get
inflation's interesting, Bob, because it's not a basic algebraic equation of 8 times x equals 16 and x equals 2. It's not that simple. And so what I tried to highlight today is, well, what would the fair tax bring to the economy? And then let's go one step further and take some insights, like a strengthening dollar with purchases from abroad. We're still going to purchase from abroad, but a strengthening dollar, we get more goods, less per unit cost. We can then extrapolate, well, then how does that affect inflation? And it's not too hard to see that the fair tax is not going to be an inflation driver, which is something we need right now.
right.
I think there are a lot of factors in the economy, and they're pretty complex.
We want to remind people that the fair tax doesn't necessarily get into legislative issues and debates from Congress about how to spend the money. It's just basically we're switching from an income tax to a tax on consumption, and the fair tax just moves the pocketbook from the Internal Revenue Service, closes it down, and puts your pocketbook back in your pocket. So, I mean,
that's a good place for it.
Yeah, I love to have my money on my hip. We used to go cash our checks at the end of the day, and they'd say, how many 20s do you want? I said, I want all ones. So it looks like I have a big wad of money in my pocket, and we'd be important at that point in time. So, I mean, but that's what putting you back in control of your spending and saving. And I think I remember one of the greatest lines that focuses on this is from the fair tax, the distributions of information throughout social media. It says, pay yourself first, feed your family, not the government, feed your family first, not the federal government. And that's a way that is absolutely an honest truism that has never been more true through implementation of fair tax.
Yep. Well said. Well said. And we will not ask the question, Bob Paxton. We will not ask Bob what establishment he was going to with all those single dollar bills. We're not going to go.
No, that was just for effect. That was
who's he tried to impress? I mean, that'll work.
This was back in 1987, by the way.
Oh, Merle, I tell you what,
we cash our checks on Friday.
We're going to have to wrap this up here, guys. I tell you what, Jade, I certainly appreciate your loaning us your expertise. Again, this is our quarterly Walle's Fair Tax World, which means that in 3 months, we'll have you back here discussing something else. Now, that's no guarantee I won't draft you before then to dig on one of our regular Fair Tax Power Radio things.
That's right.
I say we're here every 3 months with the Walle's Fair Tax World. And if you out there have got a subject that you would like to see tackled, in other words, if you'd like to ask a CPA a really hard question, you can send us your comments and suggestions at thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. And Jade, no telling what we're going to throw at you next time, but it'll be something cool.
Sounds good.
Well, it'll be what, June? Let's see, May, June, July. So it'll be the end of summer almost, and we'll all be on vacation. So instead of the background that we have here from Zoom, we'll each be in some tropical island background with the little drink with the umbrella in it as our Zoom background.
That sounds really good.
Okay, I'll see what I can dig up for that there. But until
work on that background.
Until we meet again, we're the Fair Tax Guys. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And I'm Jade Walle.
Providing you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Demand it.
So what do you need from me to get these taxes collected?
Glad you asked, because there is a fair amount of information you need to be aware of.
That's your tax plan?
Oh, no, this is just the revisions for this year's tax plan. What I need from you is you need to keep track of all of your income, as well as any taxes that you've already paid, and also any gifts that you received or gifts you've given to churches or charities or individuals throughout the entire year. Do you do any side jobs?
Every now and again.
Great, because there's some more information about that right here. Everything you need to know right here. So just simply compile that, send it in to us. Be careful, make sure there's no mistakes. If we do find mistakes were made, we can fine you or, throw you in jail. So you might want to be aware of that.
And what do you need from me?
As an individual, nothing. As a business owner, or if you're doing side jobs, I mean, yes, you would have to collect taxes on that, but well, it's all right here.
Can I get a